Greetings. I'm Professor Jagdish Sheth at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm also the founder of India China America Institute. The mission of the institute is to increase economic and technical cooperation or technology cooperation between these three nations in order to create world stability and world peace. These three nations will actually redefine the New World Order, which is what my presentation is all about. So the title of my presentation is the New Triad Power, Implications for the New World Order. If you analyze the data, till 1980s, world was dominated by 15 advanced economies, such as Japan, which is a late entrant, Western European countries, Canada, US, and maybe Australia. Power has been shifting in terms of economic growth away from advanced countries to emerging economies. And also, advanced countries had all kinds of restrictions about how their markets will be opened up through all GATT agreements, most favored agreement treatment, nation treatments, etc. Now markets are becoming more and more competitive. So 20th century economics was driven by restricted trade practices, market access practices by advanced countries. It is increasing more and more on the other side as the 21st economics, which is driven by emerging economies and by their competitive markets. What is driving this shift? There are four factors which are driving the shift, each one equally important. The first one is the aging of the advanced nations. All affluent nations are aging and aging much more rapidly than they had forecasted. Japan actually has a declining population. Germany is a zero population growth, as many deaths as births. While America still has a population growth, the rate of growth is declining over time. This is leading these nations to find growth opportunities outside of the domestic markets. Second major factor is that many emerging economies, since the collapse of communism, decided to change the paradigm through their economic policies and economic reforms to go from communism to capitalism, which means free market forces should be equally, in fact, important in a society, not just a policy. And these economic reforms have opened up these markets' potential for everybody to participate, which has led to growth, for example, in China, growth in India, growth in Africa, growth in all of the emerging economies in general. Third factor is the rise of new middle class in emerging economies. These are the middle class people who are looking for branded products. Most of the consumption in emerging economies, my estimate is about 60% is all unbranded products, and of course 90% unbranded services. And of course consumers buy those products through unorganized sector cash economy. So now we have more and more branded products for everything, and more organized retailing is coming, which is transforming the emerging economies as opportunities for investment and growth. And the last one, which is the focus of this conference, is a digital revolution. Emerging economies are leapfrogging the technology. They may be actually more ahead in technology compared to advanced economies who suffer from the investments in legacy systems. For example, cell phones. While cell phones were invented in America at Bell Labs, commercialized in America, the largest markets now are China and India, not America. And also smartphones is the same way. Today you can see e-commerce platforms much bigger and better in China than what we have in the US. This digital revolution is probably the most transformative of emerging economies becoming more and more middle income economies and ultimately advanced economies. If you look at the growth economic engine over many centuries, 1800s was all called the European century because the colonial powers provided growth for everybody in the world through colonial expansion. 1900s is already called the American century because America became the continent that provided more growth opportunities for everybody worldwide. The 21st century is called the Asian century. Most of the growth will be more coming from countries like China and India, or the BRICS nations as we call in general. But it will be only for the first half. My own estimate is running that by the second half of this 21st century will be all about what we will call African century. Very important to understand the rise of Africa in the second half of this century, and they may dominate as much and they have a larger scale compared to, in fact, China and India even. In the BRICS nations, we do have the South Africa, but I'm talking about the whole continent, sub-Sahara countries in Africa. And the reason is basically strictly economic growth among these nations. So the next chart talks about the new measures of world economies. I don't agree on personal income as a measure, which is the traditional economic measure. I believe purchasing power parity is a much better measure because it actually equalizes currency imbalances which are driven by other factors than the genuine buying power. Income may be distorted in many ways, pretty much because large population, you may have a per capita income much lower, but buying power is very neutral, very strategic. So if you take the basket of goods and the buying power, you find China today is $27.8 trillion economy in 2020, surpassed America. America is second largest with $20 trillion economy. The third one is India, about 11 trillion. And I think India is slightly underestimated because of a large cash economy compared to the other two. And then it drops suddenly. Japan, 5 trillion. Russia, 4 trillion. Germany, 4 trillion. Indonesia comes up as an emerging economy, about 3.78 trillion. Brazil comes out as 3.3 trillion. UK, 2.98 trillion. And France as the 10th economy, 2.86. So what looks very good in the nominal GDP and per capita income looks just the opposite. Among the 10 companies, 5 are all emerging economies, with the lead nation being China. The Old Triad Power, as I mentioned, consisted of 15 nations: Canada and United States, 12 common market countries, and a later entrant is Japan. As of 1987, 45% of world trade was concentrated among these triad powers: Western Europe, North America, and Japan. 70% of the world trade GDP, 70% of the world GDP value add was concentrated among the triad power nations. They got the raw materials from their former colonies or anywhere in the world, did the manufacturing and value add in the countries, and then exported, imported among themselves. The triad power, as I mentioned, desperately needs economic growth to sustain employment and their own political stability. The new triad power is now United States still continuing the journey, but it is China and India. The new triad power unfortunately has strong legacy differences about the new world order. US defeated Japan on the one hand, Germany on the other hand, created the world order through major international institutions like IMF, World Bank, and the United Nations, came out with a common perspective about the future and the governance and all that stuff. Today, it is in total disarray. It's dramatically changing now. And therefore, the new triad power is India, China, and America. The harmonious relationship, surprisingly, is between United States and India now, which is, again, 25 years ago, nobody ever imagined. Opposite is happening. United States and China are actually in negative relationship. And the question mark is between China and India. India is becoming very strategic depending upon which side it leans, very similar to the rise of communism and whether are you with the communist bloc or the capitalistic or the Western allies, or are you a non-aligned nation? Like two good athletes, there seems to be a race in a marathon between China and India. People always compare the two nations. China's growth will slow down after 2020 and its population will start aging because it's already a middle income country and population growth will not sustain in the future is a forecast by all the experts. It'll be more similar to Japan, what happened to Japan historically. India's growth will actually accelerate after 2020 post-COVID as it invests in infrastructure like China did 25, 30 years ago and reforms its industrial policy. This will have significant implications for global markets. For example, these are the two largest consumer markets for everything, not just cell phones. Automobiles, China is the largest market in the world now, unlike surpassing America. India is very strong in small automobiles, but definitely in two-wheelers, what we call scooters and motorcycles. Appliances is another industry where these are the two large consumers in the market. In fact, then all the raw materials that you have in order to make appliances, in order to make cell phones, whatever it is. There is also a rise of China and India's global enterprises. Huawei, Tata Group in India, Lenovo in computers, Birla Group in India, which is into carbon black and aluminum sheets and all this stuff. And of course, we do have companies from Brazil rising the same way, some from Russia, etc. But these two nations, China and India, are very critical toward the BRICS evolution. There is a globalization of competition now in automobile. It's becoming a global industry. Appliances is already a global industry, and so are the airlines and the aircraft manufacturers will become more than the Europeans, more than the Americans, but there will be a rise of other manufacturers, especially out of Asia. Affordability will become a key focus of innovation, whether it's in healthcare, medicine, space programs, for example. There is also likely to be a fusion of cultures, what I call Easternization of the world, not only in spirituality, but also in music and food, as we have seen the trends more recently. And ultimately, private equity, which I think is very important to understand for the next 1 decade or more, not the public equity stock market, nor the debt market, but private equity will be very key in bringing about the changes. And private equity is all now going toward emerging markets, whether it's a BlackRock, Blackstone, or KKR. Implications will be a race for resources. This nation's growth is so large, backed up by eventually Africa, that I think this rise will arise in terms of who gets the resources of the world, agricultural resources, industrial resources, and definitely manpower or human resources, talent. Resource-driven global expansion. For example, India is gaining enormously from all the multinationals in technology services, IT services, Accenture, IBM, and of course now Silicon Valley service companies such as Google, Apple, Facebook. All of them are having their own development centers. Accenture is one of the largest employers in IT services, for example. And Walmart is entering India now. Amazon is already in India. And of course, they are both, of course, in China at the same time. So this is a huge resource-driven expansion globally that's going to take place. Resource-driven global mergers will also take place in the process, especially in chemicals, both specialty chemicals like pharma and agriculture, but also in basic chemicals. You clearly see the emergence of strange bedfellows, heavy investment and involvement of China in Africa, the soft power in India also in Africa. I think that's another key factor, that the new allies and alliances will be very different than the traditional alliances and allies that we have experienced since World War II. There will be a rise of scarcity-driven profits, primarily food and energy. Surprisingly, those are such key ingredients still continuing in the 21st century, and there will be more profitability in the upstreaming activities than in the downstreaming activities. Shortage-driven breakthrough innovations. There will be a worldwide shortage of some raw materials, especially organic based or biological things, and cloning is becoming almost a necessity. We know how to clone everything, so cloning is a major innovation drive in technology. And the next major innovation drive is going to be in sustainability. Sustainability is not a nice thing to do, but will become just a necessity for a nation's economic growth, especially in emerging economies like the BRICS nations. Last area, of course, I will talk is the implications for geopolitics. World will pivot, has pivoted toward Asia. Economics will drive politics. So at Davos, which is an economic world forum, all politicians come there, world leaders come there. Economics is driving politics, not ideology or even faith to some extent. We see the rise of multilateral politics. New multilateral alliances are taking place, such as China-centric, Russia-centric, and of course America-centric. We'll see growth of sovereign funds, very large scale. China Investment Corporation, Temasek out of Singapore, Saudi Arabia Sovereign Fund, etc., etc. I do want to take a minute out here to talk about where the wealth is. Wealth is neither sovereign funds nor governments, surprisingly, and their surpluses, but the largest wealth is in the hands of individuals. It just exceeded $160 trillion. We have 20 million millionaires, and we have more than 3,000 billionaires. And it is expected that in about a decade or so, Amazon founder Jeff Bezos may be the first trillionaire. Very different world than the world we knew in the last century. You do have the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, or now what's called Belt and Road Initiative, New Development Bank, and of course Belt and Road Infrastructure Investment Worldwide. I do believe that this is going to change two major institutions, capitalism and democracy. We will redefine both of them in the 21st century as they got redefined in the 20th century, for example. And the first one is that capitalism will have to become more caring. The wealth disparity is rising to a level where you have nothing but revolts in countries that will take place. It is in the interest of the capitalists themselves and capitalism to moderate that somehow. So capitalism has to become caring capitalism, or conscious capitalism, or connected capitalism, whatever you say. In other words, the role of capitalists is not just to make more money or shareholder value, but also shared value with the community, with suppliers, with employees, and of course with customers. On the other side, democracy has to become more disciplined. Democracy without discipline is anarchy, as we have seen in protest and populism movements all over the world. So how do you put a disciplined democracy will become a major discussion point as we go into the 21st century journey. So while the 20th century was driven by restrictions on markets of emerging advanced economies, the 21st century will be driven by competitive markets and resources of emerging nations. Aging of affluent nations, economic reforms, rise of the new middle class, and digital revolution are responsible for this mega shift. This will lead to new triad power consisting of China, America, and India. Rise of Chindia, China, and India will have worldwide impact on global resources, global markets, global competition, and global politics. Fostering economic growth through technology, trade, and investment between the triad power nations will be critical for worldwide peace and stability. Demand for world resources will create strange bedfellows among nations, as well as resource-driven global expansion of all enterprises and nations. Major technology breakthroughs, including cloning and nanotechnology, will target resource conservation and resource scarcity. Key drivers of innovations will be affordability and accessibility of products and services. World economy will decouple from the dollar denomination for trade and investment, especially into some key commodity industries like energy. While China will be isolated by the Western world, India will be integrated into world political, social, and economic forums and institutions. In that triad power, the new triad power, harmony is not there. Each nation has come with a different legacy, different perspectives, different way of looking at the world. Mergers and acquisitions and private equity will play a significant role in the new triad power. Rise of India will redefine capitalism and democracy. Rise of emerging markets in general. Caring capitalism and disciplined democracy will become increasingly meaningful. Last comment is that Africa will rise. In the future, we'll be talking about Africa with the same excitement, wonder, and awe as the rise of China and the current rise of India, for example. I hope you have enjoyed this presentation. Thank you very much.